A mysterious woman arrives at a quiet shooting range and displays marksman skills that leave seasoned locals stunned. She says nothing, reveals nothing, but every movement screams experience. Her silence draws suspicion, and she's arrested for having no ID or permit. Yet even in cuffs, she exudes quiet authority. In court, tensions mount until a Navy admiral storms in, presenting a classified file that halts the proceedings. The judge dismisses all charges. The woman is revealed as Commander Lauren Blake, a ghost from a world of shadows. But why was she there, and what mission still lingers just beyond reach? If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Every click helps share powerful tales of unseen heroes and silent courage. Join our community where respect for service, honor, and mystery lives on. Don't miss what's coming next. Your support means everything. Thank you. The command rang out sharp and decisive. Take her down now. It sliced through the crisp morning air at the shooting range with all the force of a gunshot. Deputies immediately moved in, hands instinctively reaching for their cuffs as gravel crunched beneath their heavy boots. But the woman they were after didn't so much as flinch. She stood still, breathing slow and even, as though she'd faced far worse than a few men trying to detain her. That calm, almost eerie composure gave her an unexpected authority, one that seemed to eclipse even those in uniform who sought to restrain her. Hours later, the quiet hum of courtroom chatter died as the heavy doors creaked open. A Navy admiral stepped inside, his uniform immaculate and adorned with so many medals it silenced every doubt before it could be spoken. The judge, gavel raised mid-motion, froze. People stood, some confused, others in awe. In that still, suspended moment, everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman in cuffs shattered. Who was she? And why had a single sealed file turned the entire case on its head? That morning had started like many others. Mist drifted lazily off the harbor and floated across the shooting range. The sun began its slow ascent, brushing the treetops with a golden haze. The air carried the briny scent of the sea, the tang of pine, the subtle sharpness of gun oil, and the faint must of weathered wood. It was a morning that belonged to people like Sam Grady, people who didn't rise early because they had to, but because those silent hours before the world woke held something close to peace. Sam stood on the porch of the range office, a mug of black coffee warming his palm. 68 years had taught him to read people like maps, subtle lines, hidden layers, routes known only through long experience. His decades in the Navy, much of it spent submerged in submarines, had left him with a sixth sense for tension, the kind you can't see but feel vibrating beneath your skin. And that morning it started with her. She arrived in an old, battered truck, its paint dulled to a primer gray hue, unadorned by stickers or any personalized plates. It told you nothing, which in turn said everything. She climbed out wordlessly, carrying a long, nondescript case as if it weighed nothing at all. Sam noted how she selected the farthest lane, the one tucked closest to the tree line, offering the broadest view and the most concealment. It was always that lane, the one chosen by people who preferred to keep things in sight. She didn't draw attention to herself. Faded jeans, a plain gray jacket, a ball cap pulled low enough to shadow her face. No tactical patches, no showy gear, no idle chatter. The silence that followed her wasn't awkward. It was intentional, the kind that comes from choosing to listen more than speak. Sam watched her closely as she opened her rifle case. No rush, no hesitation, just precise practice motion. Every move she made told a story of experience, real experience, the kind you couldn't pick up in a weekend class or by watching YouTube tutorials. Her rifle was well kept but simple. No glittering attachments, no state-of-the-art scope that cost more than a month's rent. And yet, the moment she took her stance and sighted in her target, Sam knew this woman didn't come here for recreation. The first shot cracked across the still air, sharp and clean. A clang echoed from 300 yards out. Bullseye. Sam didn't outwardly react, but something inside him stirred. That wasn't casual shooting. That was muscle memory. Second shot, another hit. By the third, the regulars at the range began to take notice. Jake Myers, one of the weekend warriors who spent more time bragging than shooting, lowered his rifle and squinted downrange. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered. Sam didn't answer. He focused instead on the woman's breathing, slow and deliberate, the kind of rhythm he'd seen Navy SEALs master during training. The kind of breathing that turns seconds into eternity, that narrows the world into a single beat on a target. She made adjustments for wind without checking a gauge. No theatrics, no wasted motion, just tiny shifts. Shoulders, feet, breath, adjust, breathe, jitter. Sam could almost hear the cadence in his head. More people started to gather behind the porch, drawn by the quiet gravity of her presence. "Never seen her before," someone whispered. "Look at that grouping, tight like she's got a bench rest and a damn wind meter," another said. "Military maybe? Law enforcement?" Nobody knew, and the not knowing irked them more than they admitted. In small towns, identity is everything. People value knowing who you are, where you come from, what you've done. Outsiders are noticed, not out of spite, but from a lifetime of shared history and quiet vigilance. Sam understood that. He felt the curiosity too, but more than that, he felt something heavier, something sobering. This woman wasn't just skilled, she was trained, and not the kind of training you pick up at your local range. She struck steel at 400 yards. At 500, the target jolted under the force of another flawless off-the shot. Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd, but none dared interrupt her. Even the skeptics had gone quiet, transfixed. One of the newer guys, fresh from the city and still trying to blend in, edged closer to Sam. "That normal around here?" he asked, trying for a casual tone and failing miserably. Sam gave him a measured glance. "What's normal, son?" The kid shrugged, uncomfortable. "I mean, that kind of shooting? Just raw skill, no gadgets, just instinct?" Sam let the question hang for a moment. He watched as the woman reloaded, eyes scanning the tree line, the far hills, the access road, all without moving her head much. Just her eyes, always scanning, always aware. "She's not showing off," Sam finally said. "She's training. The way people do when the stakes are higher than paper targets." The kid frowned. "So, should we be worried?" Sam didn't look away. His eyes stayed on the woman as she paused, magazine spent, and the world seemed to still with her. "I don't think worried is the word I'd use." He set down his coffee. The cup had gone stone cold. He hadn't even noticed. Lowering the rifle with deliberate care, she remained utterly still for a moment, as though attuned to a frequency no one else could hear. Her stillness wasn't hesitation. It was attention, something sharp and intentional. Then, almost imperceptibly, she turned her head and cast a brief glance toward the range office, just long enough for Sam to catch her eye. In that fleeting second, something passed between them, unspoken but certain, and Sam understood. This wasn't some ordinary visitor or wandering shooter. Whatever path she walked was far beyond small-town routines or the idle curiosity of local onlookers. She wasn't merely passing through. This woman belonged to a different world, the kind built on silence, precision, and the kind of discipline only shadows respected. A world Sam once knew well. The old sailor in him stirred to life again, his instincts humming with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. By mid-morning, the range no longer carried its usual peaceful air. The early mist had lifted, the sky turning clear and hard as glass, but the atmosphere was thick with something else, tension that clung like humidity before a storm. Conversations had dulled into hushed murmurs. Heads turned again and again toward the woman stationed at the far end of the line. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. Inside the range office, Sam Grady stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his weathered eyes fixed on the two patrol cars pulling into the lot. Dust curled around their tires as they came to a slow stop. His heart dipped. He'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. But in a town like this, anything that doesn't quite fit sticks out like a sore thumb. And when that happens, the badge always follows. "Morning, Sam," called the deputy in the lead. Colin Mercer, still young, still trying to earn the weight of that badge on his chest. A good kid, polite, careful, not yet jaded by the job. His partner, Ramirez, older, more seasoned, silent, scanned the range with the cool gaze of someone expecting things to go sideways. "Morning, Colin," Sam said, though he already knew the script. "Everything all right?" Mercer hesitated just long enough to reveal his discomfort. "We got a call about a possible unauthorized firearm. Woman down at the far lane matches the description. No ID badge, no range membership, no permit on file." Sam let out a slow breath through his nose. "She's not caused any harm." Mercer's eyes flicked with conflict. He wanted to believe Sam, wanted to leave it alone. But duty, that relentless compass, overrode instinct. "We gotta check it out, Sam. You know how it goes." Sam stepped back and held the door open. "Yeah, I know." The two deputies approached the woman with cautious intent, their boots crunching the gravel path like a warning. From the window, Sam watched her. She didn't turn, didn't tense or challenge. She simply lowered her rifle again, gently, respectfully, and stood upright, hands loose at her sides, clearly visible. She looked like someone who had rehearsed this moment before, or perhaps lived it too many times already. "Ma'am," Mercer began, voice firm but steady, "we're going to need to see some identification and your firearm permit." Her eyes met his, cool, unwavering. "I don't have them with me." There was no fear in her tone, no scrambling for excuses, just plain, unvarnished truth. It settled in the air with surprising weight. "Can you give us your name?" Nothing. Not even the shift of her shoulders, just a slight tightening at the corners of her mouth, like she'd carefully considered every possible answer and found none that would protect her. Ramirez shifted his footing beside Mercer. "Ma'am," he said quietly but with edge, "refusing to identify yourself can be considered a criminal offense. We need your cooperation." Still she said nothing. Silence stretched between them. Mercer cast a quick glance at his partner, eyes uncertain. Sam could see the internal battle play out, the desire to trust versus the training that demanded action. Ramirez gave the faintest nod. "A cue, let's move forward, clean and by the book." "Ma'am," Mercer said again, his voice lower now, almost regretful, "we're going to have to take you in until we can verify your identity." She gave the smallest nod in response, as though she had already known how this would end. Mercer moved to cuff her, fingers brushing the steel from his belt. His hands, despite his best effort, trembled slightly. She didn't look dangerous, he told himself. But then again, the dangerous ones rarely did. The cuffs clicked closed around her wrists. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Something final settled over the range like a sudden drop in air pressure. She allowed herself to be led without a word, her footsteps aligning calmly with the deputies. She didn't slouch or lower her gaze. She walked between them like someone in command, like someone granting them permission to escort her. As they passed the range office, Sam stepped outside. She turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge him. A flicker of recognition passed through her expression. Not fear, not resentment, but assessment, calm, clinical, like a strategist piecing together a plan no one else understood. "You're doing your job, son," Sam said quietly to Mercer as they loaded her into the patrol car. The young deputy didn't speak. His nod was tight, his jaw clenched hard. The engine started, gravel spun, and the two cruisers pulled away, leaving behind silence where tension had lived. Sam stood there for a long time after they disappeared down the road. Then, as if waking from a trance, he turned and walked back inside. He picked up the phone, no hesitation this time. His finger dialed the number from memory. The line clicked, and a weary voice answered. "Pentagon Operations Center." "This is Sam Grady, Coastal Harbor Range," he said. "I need to speak to someone about an individual who may be of interest. I think you'll want to move fast." The line went still. Then the voice sharpened with sudden alertness. "Tell me what you've got, Mr. Grady." Sam didn't embellish. He laid it all out plainly, the precision of her shots, the unnatural discipline, the scar that hadn't come from anything recreational, the professionalism that spoke volumes without her needing to utter a word. "We'll handle it," said the voice. "Thank you for bringing this to us." Sam hung up slowly, his eyes drifting back to the range outside, now empty except for the lone target still swaying gently in the late morning breeze. He'd done what he could. The rest was no longer up to him. and somehow that truth sat heavier than he'd ever imagined it would. The wood-paneled courtroom, with its tall windows weathered by salt air and time, had never been meant for a moment like this. Its purpose had always been mundane: disputes between fishermen, noise complaints, the occasional tavern brawl on Main Street. But today, something heavier settled in its creaking benches. A weight made of curiosity, wariness, in the simmering tension of a small town stumbling into something far beyond its borders. Every seat was filled. Locals, drawn in by swirling rumors, packed the room. Reporters from Portland had driven down, sensing a story worth chasing. Scattered throughout like silent sentinels stood men in dark suits, faces expressionless, eyes watchful, stationed at the margins like they belonged to another world entirely. At the front of the courtroom sat a woman, solitary at the defense table. Her name was Lauren Blake, though no one in the crowd knew it yet. She wore the unmistakable orange of a county inmate, but it couldn't touch the calm that radiated from her. Her hands cuffed, rested still in her lap, catching bits of the morning sun. She didn't fidget, didn't flinch. Amidst the storm of unease swirling around her, she was the eye, serene, grounded. Beside her, the public defender looked flustered, flipping through a thin manila folder with increasing frustration. He had only met her that morning, and she was already more enigma than client. No name offered, no details, no explanation. Just that silence and that unnerving composure. Judge Rebecca Lane presided from the bench. Her back was straight, her silver hair coiled in a no-nonsense twist. The years had done nothing to soften her. Once a formidable JAG officer, she'd seen more than she cared to remember, enough to still wake her some nights. She scanned the docket, and annoyance creased her brow. This wasn't how she'd planned to spend her morning. "Let's proceed," she ordered, voice clipped and firm. The court clerk read the charges aloud: possession of an unregistered firearm, refusal to identify, potential ties to terrorist activity. The courtroom stirred, shifting bodies, a collective discomfort. Pens scratched across reporters' notebooks. But Lauren didn't move. Judge Lane studied her intently. There was something familiar. Not in her face, not exactly, but in her bearing, that posture, that stillness. It wasn't born of fear. It was the stillness of someone who had stood before forces more dangerous than anyone in this room could fathom. Someone who had learned that silence could carry the weight of strength. Then it happened. The heavy courtroom doors at the back swung open with a resounding thud. The sound alone brought the room to stillness. Through the doorway stepped a Navy Admiral. His uniform was pristine, ribbons and medals precise in their arrangement. He moved like a man who carried command in his very bones. Without a word, he approached the bench. Every veteran in the room sat straighter, instinct overriding memory. Even those long removed from military life felt it in their posture, a reflex of reverence. The reporters froze, pens poised midair. Judge Lane slowly set down her gavel, hands steady though her gaze sharpened. The Admiral handed a sealed envelope to the court bailiff, who, normally impassive, visibly swallowed before passing it to the judge. Lane broke the seal and read. And as she did, everyone watched the change ripple across her expression. Surprise first, then recognition, and finally something close to awe. When she looked up, her voice had softened, but it carried through the room like a bell. "In light of this documentation from the Department of Defense," she said, "all charges against the defendant are dismissed, effective immediately." The room held its breath. "This case," she continued, "is now classified as a matter of national security. There will be no further discussion in this court." The Admiral turned to Lorset and held her gaze, and for the first time she stood, not as a prisoner, but as the person she truly was. She rose with poise, her shoulders squared, chin lifted. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. A presence, a protector, a warrior hidden in plain view. Judge Lane gave a faint, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement between those who had worn the uniform and carried the burden. Then the Admiral spoke, his voice low but unwavering. "Commander Blake has served this nation with distinction," he said. "The specifics of her service are classified, as they should be. But let it be known, she poses no threat to your community. Quite the opposite. Near the front, Detective Mark Ellis felt a slow flush creep up his neck. He had helped arrest her. Now, watching this unfold, he realized how far out of his depth he'd been. Without thinking, he stood. "Commander," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She turned to face him. Their eyes met, and in that glance, the tension broke. Not with accusation, not with anger, but with grace. "Oh, no apology necessary, Detective," she said, her voice composed and kind. "You were doing your duty, and you did it well." The courtroom remained hushed as she stepped forward, not escorted, not restrained. Protected. Walked out by the Admiral himself, flanked by those once shadowy figures, now revealing themselves as her own. The heavy doors closed behind them, leaving behind only stunned silence. And the people of the town, many of whom had never looked beyond their shoreline, were left with nothing but questions, and a quiet, humbling sense that they had just glimpsed something vast, hidden, and far greater than they had ever imagined. Long after the crowd dispersed and the echoes faded, that sense lingered. The echoes of that morning hadn't fully faded. A heavy stillness hung over Coastal Harbor, much like the fog that crept in at dawn, low and stubborn, unwilling to lift. Detective Mark Ellis sat in his parked car, hands loosely resting on the steering wheel, his gaze unfocused, lost in a sea of memory. Again and again, his mind replayed the same scene, the metal of the cuffs against her wrists, the way her eyes held steady, unwavering, the exact second the Admiral walked through those double doors. He had thought he was doing the right thing, following protocol, upholding the law, protecting the town. That was what he'd been trained to do. But something didn't sit right. Deep in his gut, shame had taken root. Not over the arrest itself, he'd done what his badge and oath required. No, what haunted him was how completely he had missed it. Missed her, the strength that didn't show itself in loud declarations or commanding presence, but in quiet resilience. In discipline carried without complaint. In sacrifice offered without expecting applause. How many times had he passed people like her on the street without ever truly seeing them? The sheriff's office was subdued that afternoon. The usual clatter and half-hearted jokes were gone, replaced by a reflective quiet that stretched across desks and lingered in corners. Sheriff Daniels stood leaning on the doorframe of Mark's office, arms folded across his chest, eyes unfocused, as if seeing something far off. "Well," Daniel said eventually, the word hanging in the silence. "That was one for the books." Mark nodded slowly. "We never saw it coming. Could have been any of us." There was kindness in the sheriff's voice, a gentleness that tried to lift the weight pressing down on Mark. But it wasn't enough. "I keep thinking about how calm she was," Mark said, his voice low. "She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. It was like she already knew, like she'd accepted that we were just one more stop in a story way bigger than us." Daniels looked thoughtful, his gaze drifting. "Some folks," he said, "walk paths we can't see. Only catch glimpses of them when the light hits just right." Miles away out at the range, Sam Grady stood watching the sun begin its slow descent. The long shadows stretched across the shooting lanes, and the target closest to him still bore her mark. Precise, tight groupings, cleanly punched into steel and paper. The kind of shooting that spoke volumes without saying a word. He dragged his hand along the wooden railing, worn smooth by years of repetition. This place, for the longest time, had been just that. A place. A shooting range for locals, for hobbyists, for those passing through. But not anymore. Something had shifted. Today, it became more than a range. It became a waypoint, a refuge, a quiet, sacred space for those carrying burdens too heavy for the rest of the world to understand. Sam thought back to the phone call he'd made, the one that had brought the Admiral. The person on the other end hadn't needed a name. Just the description had been enough. That said everything. Commander Blake was no ordinary person. And clearly this wasn't the first time she'd moved quietly through towns like theirs, doing work that went unseen, uncelebrated. Sam didn't regret making the call. He hadn't done it out of suspicion or fear. He'd done it out of something much deeper. Respect. Respect for who she was, what she stood for, and the unshakable truth he had sensed even without knowing the full story. In the days that followed, whispers would ripple through the town. People would talk about the mystery woman, the Admiral, the sealed file. The questions would spread, and with all sorts of half-made-up stories. But Mark, Sam, and the sheriff, they wouldn't speculate. They'd seen something real. Just a flicker. But enough. They knew better now. That evening, as the horizon swallowed the last of the sun, Mark found himself down by the harbor. The rhythmic pull of the waves called to him, and out at sea a naval vessel moved steadily across the water, a dark silhouette against the fading light. He thought of the Admiral's words, "She's no threat to your community." Quite the opposite, she'd said, and Mark believed it. He remembered the silent nod shared between Judge Lane and the commander, an exchange that didn't need a single word. That was what duty looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It often stood alone, misunderstood, carrying the weight of the world so others didn't have to. The next morning, Sam arrived early to the range. A thin veil of mist clung to the grass, making everything feel still, sacred even. He went about his usual routine, checking targets, replacing a few, wiping down the counter in the office. Simple tasks. But deep down, he knew this place had changed. It wasn't just for casual weekends anymore. From now on, it would be something more, an invisible checkpoint for people like her. Men and women who walked in the shadows, so that the rest of the world could bask in the light. He didn't need to hang a sign, didn't need to say a word. The ones who needed this place, they would know. Somehow they always did. Later that afternoon, Mark returned. He stood near the edge of the range, hands tucked in his coat pockets, watching Sam clean up spent shells and adjust a stand. "Figured I'd find you here," Mark said quietly. "Always am," Sam replied without looking up. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, the kind that doesn't press for conversation. The rows of targets stretched out before them, and the peace of the scene was deceptive. So much had happened here, and they both felt it. "I keep going over what she said," Mark finally broke the silence. "No apology necessary. We were doing our duty. But how do you serve like that and carry no bitterness?" Sam's gaze stayed steady. "You serve like that," he said, "because it's not about you. It's about the job. What needs to be done. And when you really know that, deep in your bones, there's no room left for bitterness." Mark took a deep breath, the salt air of Coastal Harbor sharp in his lungs. And in that moment, something settled inside him. A quiet understanding. A humbling, a necessary shift. As the sun climbed higher over the town, both men stood a little straighter, held a little more resolve in their hearts. They had seen something that would not fade with time. In fact, the memory only grew sharper as days turned into weeks. The image of that silent woman in cuffs, the Admiral's firm presence, the weight of what had gone unspoken, it lived on in them, and they were better for it. It had been a humbling experience, one Mark Ellis hadn't expected, yet it reshaped him in a way he couldn't ignore. When he returned to his position at the sheriff's office, things looked the same on the surface. The same desk, same badge, same small town calls. But inside, nothing felt the same. Every interaction, every suspect he faced, every radio call he answered carried a new weight. He was no longer just doing his job. He was seeing people differently. He saw the layers beneath their stories, the quiet burdens they bore, the sacrifices they never spoke about. He recognized the space between justice and judgment, that narrow, shifting line that demanded more than just a badge to navigate. So when the opportunity arose, an invitation to join the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, to act as a bridge between civilian law enforcement and military special operations, Mark didn't even pause. He accepted it without hesitation. Somewhere deep down, he knew the world that had revealed itself to him that day wasn't finished with him. And if he was honest with himself, he didn't want it to be. There was more to learn, more to serve, more to understand. His new assignment took him far beyond the borders of Coastal Harbor. He found himself in cities he'd never planned to visit, in briefing rooms filled with quiet professionals who spoke little and carried much. His missions were discreet, his travel frequent. But no matter how far he went, the lessons from that unassuming town and its quiet courtroom clung to him like the scent of sea air. They shaped how he operated, how he listened, how he judged. His job wasn't just about upholding the law anymore. It was about honoring it. It was about knowing when the law needed interpretation, when it needed compassion, and when it needed someone to quietly do what had to be done. Back in Coastal Harbor, Sam Grady remained the steady soul behind the shooting range. On the outside, nothing had changed. The weather-worn signs still hung crooked over the gate, refusing to be straightened no matter how many times someone tried. The air inside the office still held that familiar blend of strong coffee and gun oil, and the lanes still rang with the sharp cracks of gunfire and the low murmur of quiet conversation. But something beneath the surface had shifted. Without fanfare, without ceremony, a quiet stream of strangers began to trickle through the range. Men and women who didn't boast or pose. They didn't ask questions, didn't offer stories. But the way they moved, the precision in how they handled a weapon, the way they scanned the area out of habit, spoke of training that went far beyond recreational shooting. They came, practiced, and left. No names exchanged, no explanations required. And Sam welcomed them all the same. A silent nod, a subtle gesture that said, "You have a place here." Now and then, especially in the fading light of an autumn evening, when the sun stretched long across the empty lanes and everything was cast in gold, Sam's thoughts would wander back to Commander Blake. He never saw her again after that day, but she didn't need to return. The impression she left was deeper than any bullet hole in a target. Her presence had settled into the bones of the place. Then, one crisp morning, as leaves blew like whispers across the pavement, Mark returned. It had been months since his last visit, months packed with classified assignments, coordinated ops, and silent victories. But something intangible had pulled him back. Maybe it was the memory of the courtroom that had reshaped his career. Maybe it was the salty pull of the ocean, or simply a need to remind himself of who he was before everything changed. He found Sam exactly where he expected him to be, walking the far lane, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the targets. "Didn't expect to see you," Sam said, his voice rough but kind, a hint of a smile lifting the corners of his mouth. Mark gave a quiet laugh. "Didn't expect to be here, but I had to come back, needed to remember where it started." They stood in a moment of shared silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Together they watched as a young woman set herself up at a nearby lane. There was something familiar about her stance. No flair, no wasted motion, just control, precision, intent. "Another one?" Mark asked in a low voice. Sam nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "They always find their way." Mark watched her a moment longer before turning back to Sam. "You ever think about stepping away, letting someone else take over?" Sam considered it. He had, from time to time. The years weighed on him more than they used to, but he shook his head. "Not yet. Someone's got to keep the door open for folks like her." Later, as the sun climbed higher and the chill burned off the air, Mark joined Sam in replacing some of the worn-out target stands. The work was simple, grounding. As they labored side by side, the conversation turned to duty, to the meaning of service, to the invisible ways people shielded what mattered without seeking praise. Mark spoke of his new role, of agents who walked unnoticed among crowds, of operations that neutralized threats before they ever reached headlines, of sacrifices made in silence. There were stories he couldn't tell, details he had to leave out. But Sam didn't need those. He understood. He could feel the shape of the story, the weight behind each word. As dusk approached and Mark prepared to leave, Sam disappeared into his office and returned with something in his weathered hand. It was an old brass challenge coin, worn smooth by years of handling. The emblem on it was nearly rubbed away, but the coin had heft. Meaning, he placed it in Mark's hand. "Carry it," Sam said quietly, "not because it's worth anything to anyone else, but because it reminds you who you are, where you come from." Mark curled his fingers around it, the metal already warming in his palm. "I won't forget." He meant it. As he drove away, the range behind him fell silent once more. But it wasn't an empty kind of silence. It was the kind that carried intention, that spoke of resilience and quiet strength. The kind of silence built by those who live in the shadows, who protect without recognition, who stand firm without applause. And that woman who had once walked into that courtroom, who had stood on that range with unshakable focus. She left more behind than the echo of gunfire or unanswered questions. She left a quiet reminder, a truth that still resonates, especially in the noise of today's world. Not every hero wears a uniform you can see. Not every act of bravery comes with a crowd's cheer. And not everyone you pass by is who they seem. In towns like Coastal Harbor, it was easy to think you knew every story, every face. But when someone like her arrived, quiet, capable, expecting nothing, it shook people. Because deep down, it reminded them of something they'd rather forget. Sometimes the most crucial work happens in silence, in the background, without anyone knowing. So the next time you cross paths with someone who moves a little differently, whose eyes seem to scan the world just a little more sharply, think twice before you decide who they are. Maybe they're just another face in the crowd. Or maybe they've given more than you'll ever know. The rest of us safe. And now it brings me to something I've been meaning to ask you, something I hope you'll think about, just for a moment. If you had been there that day, standing on that dusty range or sitting quietly in the back of that courtroom, what would you have done? Would you have felt it, that there was more beneath the surface of her story? Would you have paused, even for a heartbeat, before rushing to judge? I hope you will. I hope you'll reflect on that, and if you feel moved to, share your thoughts below, especially if you've served or if someone close to you has worn the uniform. Your voice matters. Your experiences carry weight. They remind the rest of us of something we often forget, that real service doesn't always arrive in fanfare and ceremony. It doesn't always get a standing ovation or a folded flag handed off under the glare of a camera. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a silent act of strength, offered in solitude when nobody's watching. It happens in moments that won't make the evening news, moments that slip by unnoticed by the world but leave a mark that lasts forever. And if this story stirred something in you, if it gave you pause as you think about the people you pass each day, or maybe brought back memories of someone you once knew, someone who walked a quiet path with courage, I hope you'll consider showing support. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't, not for me, but because every time you do, you help these stories, the ones that deserve to be heard, find their way to others. It helps honor the memory of those who serve not for recognition, but simply because it's the right thing to do. It keeps their legacies alive. So thank you for being here, for choosing to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. And thank you most of all for remembering that in this vast, beautiful country of ours, it's often the quietest heroes, the ones whose names we may never know, who shape our world in the most profound ways. May we carry that awareness forward. May we all try just a little harder to look beyond the surface, to see deeper, to judge slower. God bless you.